Hello, everyone, and welcome to another PropModo live webinar. As always, I will be your host, Franco, and today we will be talking about cost-cutting techniques in Class A multifamily. Obviously, like every property class, multifamily has some ups and downs. I think there's a lot of mixed signals about the future right now of what's going to happen. I think everyone's celebrating the interest rates going down, cost of capital hopefully will come back down to earth, but I think it's going to be a long road until we get somewhere where it is manageable for a lot of operators. And in the meantime, inflation has made things more expensive. Insurance has made things more expensive. And so, in this webinar, we're going to go through different ways of controlling these costs without hurting the revenue or hurting the resident experience. Obviously, you don't want to cut costs at the cost of revenue. So lots of good techniques we'll hopefully go over and get into some specifics. As always, this is a live event. If dogs bark in the background, you will hear them. Likewise, we're happy to have any of you weigh in with some questions. We won't wait till the end for questions. We'll just take them at the moment. So anything we're talking about, if you have some follow-ups, I know looking through the registration, there's a lot of really expert operators here in the audience today. So we're happy to go through any questions you have at the time. So I also would like to drop a poll in here. We're just kind of interested to see who's here with us, what your expertise is, what's your role in the industry. So if you get a chance, please go in and answer some of these. This helps us as we go along to kind of tailor the conversation. And I think, yeah, it can really help us understand where you guys are all coming from. Likewise, the chat and the Q&A are open. Please feel free to say hi and yeah, add any questions that you have and we'll answer them right on the spot. So without further ado, I want to introduce, my two great panelists here. First, we have Mendoa Martin. She's Senior Vice President of Multifamily Operations at JLL. Hi, Mendoa.
Hi.
Next, we have Lisa Ye. She's President of Central. Central is a multifamily and hospitality operator. Hi, Lisa. Morning.
Hey there. Thanks for having me.
I always like to start these with a little bit of a state of the market, right? And I realize that everybody has, a different view of what's going on based on what properties you have, what geographies you're in. But I just kind of wanted to get a sense from both of you, what you're seeing in the market as far as, like I said, I think there are some mixed signals right now. I think there's some optimism about rent staying high, the economy, we seem to have had a soft landing, at least for now. Yet obviously there's threats, right? I think, Harris just released her recommendation for, a lot more building. And I think, we're going to start to see a lot more supply come online. And obviously costs, I don't think are going to go down anytime soon, even with inflation, lower, it's still persistent. So I think we're going to see cost rise. So Mendoa, I know you work with lots of clients. I'm just kind of interested to hear what you're seeing, what's going on in the multifamily market, particularly when it comes to the Class A multifamily.
Sure. So first of all, thank you so much for having me. And I agree with so much of what you just said. And really, when I think of the current state of the market, the first thing that comes to my mind is interest rates. I just read an article recently, and I don't recall exactly where it was, but it echoed my sentiment, which I think is that the Fed's anticipated move to reduce interest rates, if we think that's really a cure-all, I think we're going to be disappointed. It will likely bring some relief, but I don't think it's necessarily going to solve for all of the other challenges we're facing, particularly in residential. And this includes expenses, as you said, that continue to increase, and rents that are really no longer able to cover the spread. And really speaking to expenses, I think we all know that costs have increased. Insurance is one category that has seen probably the sharpest increases overall. But beyond that, other major growth expense areas are payroll and benefits and utilities, R&M. And all of those things are really typical in our industry. But what hasn't been typical are the expense jumps that we've seen since 2021. These have really been unparalleled. I was doing a little research and looking at Moody's, and in these four categories, the annual dollar growth is double to triple that of the previous decades. And I think what we need to keep in mind is that these types of expenses rarely, if ever, do an about face. Maybe they might not be going down. If they do, maybe it's probably not by much. So compounding that with the slowing and in some markets declining rent growth, we can deep dive into that in another webinar. But this combination is currently and will continue to put a tremendous stress on NOI. So the pressure to operate on less is very real. And I don't think we've ever, but we've never approached these headwinds with a wait and see kind of attitude. We're continually thinking about how we can drive performance at our assets, maximize revenue, and of course, thoughtfully and intelligently control expenses. These things will always be our focus regardless of the climate. And so I'll wrap it up with this thought. So if you can find $25,000 of savings before the end of this year, so December 31st of 2024, and apply a 5.5 cap to that, you're creating nearly $500,000 of value, and that is really meaningful. So hopefully Lisa and I can provide some actionable takeaways by sharing our insights into the ways that we find opportunities and create initiatives to positively impact the value of our assets.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think the people outside of the industry are, celebrating the, at least the loose, the release of the pressure of the Fed's increasing interest rates. But when you look at the projections, I mean, they're not going to come down much until the end of 2025. So the price pressures, particularly when it comes to the cost of capital, are going to continue. So yeah, I think that's really, really spot on. And I think, there's in the foreseeable future, we're going to have to see a lot of buildings, tightening their belt and reducing costs. So Lisa, I'd like to hear from you. Obviously, give first before you jump into it, kind of give us an idea of Central, where you guys are located, what your kind of niche is, and then kind of get into what you're seeing with all of your operations.
Yeah, thanks for having me. So Central is the leading multifamily Class A operator. So we cover a national footprint at this point. So we're both on the West Coast all the way to the East Coast. We have about 35 assets currently under contract, about $4 billion of AUM. And so we're really only in the markets with Class A assets. And so the reason for that is that we believe that that's where we can drive the highest in terms of NOI growth and incremental NOI over the traditional multifamily operations. And so most of our assets were getting about 20% NOI higher NOI than if you ran it as a strictly 100% multifamily. And so the way we do that is through a mixture of both short-term and mid-length, where we're doing arbitrage on the pricing, but also on a full service building, which means that we've completely activated all the amenity spaces so that those are willing to pay higher rent to live in these buildings.
Yeah, and so what are you seeing? I mean, what are some of the trends? Obviously, you can break it up. Regionally, there are huge differences, but I guess I want to know too, is it you're mostly in kind of central business districts as well, right? The downtown core.
Yeah, we're originally core Class A assets, but I agree with everything that's been said. Yeah, I agree with everything that's said, but I think one of my favorite quotes from Warren Buffett is, "Only when the tide goes out do you learn who has been swimming naked." And I think that now with the pressure that a lot of operators are in, you can quickly tell who are the amateurs, who are the average, and who are really, truly better operations. And so I think both the operators and the owners have to do the work. You have to go through every single line item in your expenses and instigate, why are we spending money on this? Why are we spending money on that? And that there's no replacement for that. And so generally, when we take over an asset, when we look at an asset, we go through every single charge in GL. So something as simple as, I use the example of like a trash bill. Most people, we just pay the trash bill and it goes away. But are you actually pulling the trash bill to see how many times it's been picked up? And did you go check the trash bin to see that the trash is full every single time, right? And I bet you a lot of people don't do that because it's easy to just say, hey, that's how it's always been. And so I think that, with the market state is right now, it is really challenging for a lot of operators. And so it's even more important that you have to do the work and know your assets truly inside and out for you to really drive the highest performance. And so, obviously we're in these Class A buildings. Our owners hold us, responsible for generating the highest NOI. So even though we're driving higher revenue growth, we are scrutinizing every single expense to make sure that if these were our assets, that's how we would treat it. And so we have a model that says act like an owner, because if it was your asset and your money was on the line, you betcha you're going to question every dollar that goes out of your pocketbook.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I've certainly noticed a trend of, I think before, when rent growth was just, kept going for seemingly ever, a lot of owners would kind of just buy an asset and just park on it, right? That was
it's easy to be a genius when the market's going.
Yeah, exactly, right. But now it seems like we have the kind of the bookends, right? We have, some companies going more just the asset management side, like, okay, we want to outsource to a professional operator, or we want to like roll our sleeves up and get into the operations of this building. I think, like you're saying, particularly if you bought, with the low cap rate, there's probably some tightening that needs to happen around. I don't think that most owners are in a position to just park some money and, in 5 years we'll, cash this back out and make some money off of this, and everything will be great. So
I mean, you're spot on. I mean, it's the notion that if you do the same thing, expect different results. So if you have the same operator, you're in the same market, you're competing with everyone else, you have to do something different. You have to set your product apart. Otherwise, you're going to end up performing the same as the folks down the street, right? I mean, I think that's just the common sense. So being complacent during this time is a death to the asset itself. It's like, you have to go through every single detail. You have to question, where can I do things differently to get different results? And so I think we've been under a lot of pressure. This is probably good in some sense, because what do they say? Pressure makes diamonds. I think it's going to make a bunch of diamond out of some of us, and some folks just won't be able to cut in this market because they just don't have the diligence to go through every single expense item or every revenue growth.
Yeah, these are not passive investments anymore. Like, you really do have to be active in it. So great. Let's get into a little bit about, how to actually cut some of these costs. I think when we look at the line items, probably the biggest, section is, the operations, right? The actual management, maybe a little bit into the maintenance as well. But, when we look at the full on management of one of these Class A buildings, where do you think there is some room for cost cutting, and with the caveat of that won't significantly reduce the experience, right? I think that's everyone's key, is to make sure that you still maintain this kind of Class A feel without maybe as many, people walking around, concierge and everything. At least I want to stick with you on this to kind of hear what you guys have done. When you said you come in and that's the first thing you do is go line by line, like, when you look at the list of employees and what everyone's doing, how do you reorganize? Do you shave off some employees? How does this look?
We do. We look at the quality of employees, because I mean, again, there's nothing substituting active management. So when you look at the sales staff, right, you have to check, are they converting? Are they closing sales? Those are not closing, or why are they there, right? Like, you have to have metrics and KPIs for the team, and same thing with maintenance, right? If you don't have those things, then you're not running an effective payroll. So essentially, anytime you're not being efficient, you're basically wasting money. And that goes, it's the same thing with utilities that I mentioned about trash, and even something as, electricity. Are there opportunities to do sustainable projects like solar to alleviate the pressure off electricity? Certain states, there's obvious opportunities for those. And then when you go down the list, when you look at maintenance and you look at paint and stuff like that, are you doing bulk procurement negotiations to buy items in bulk? And are you actually sourcing the same materials? Because usually if you supply different flooring material, your turnover costs will go up, because now you have to stock different ones. And so when you're looking at something as simple as like we're turning over a unit, are there opportunities for you to do hard surface flooring throughout and not even have carpet in the bedroom, which people think that that's desirable, but when you look at turnover costs, you still now need to call somebody to clean the carpet. So you're not really saving money if you keep it in the bedroom. And so there's so many different ways that you can add value, and it's a relationship between, are there capital dollars that you're willing to spend to alleviate the pressure on the operating expenses, right? Because there's projects that you could do to save the cost in terms of both labor But I think what I'm trying to get down to is that not only do you have to look through every GL and scrutinize, you have to look at like, how are you measuring the success of the communities for each of the communities? And then you have to benchmark it across to say, like, am I paying more or less than other properties that are in the area? That's how you know if you're beating the comps. And so, my model has always been like, I can't fix the market. I just need to beat all the guys next to me, right? It's all about survival. I just need to make sure that like I beat everyone else. I can't fix the market. And so there are just so many different tools you could do to alleviate costs. But those are some of the examples that when we're going through, the financial of the assets, we're going through and trying to figure out, okay, where can we add a value?
Mm-hmm. And what about, I know one of the ways that people like to cut costs is to look for, less expensive employees, right? I think there's a skew in any employee, particularly when you're talking about someone who's managing a large building, right? And are you okay with paying on the top end of employee if you really find that they are, a little bit better than someone who might be, a new entrant out of college or something?
Yeah, no, we actually pay better at leadership positions. The reason being is that you get what you pay for. And most of our general managers come from some type of hospitality background, because our buildings, when you think about it, it's run similar to a hotel in terms of services. Our fitness centers at times are run by professional athletes, sometimes even a former NFL player. And so you can't have a GM that's been out of school for a year to be able to run the entire building. We have residents that, they're paying top dollars. We have some of the most expensive rents in the country. I have to hire a caliber talent. And we truly believe that when you hire like a top caliber talent, they will deliver results. And so we really embody our GMs to think like an owner, to say like, is this the best way to spend your dollar, or do you allocate to something else? And so it requires somebody with a vision, somebody who's entrepreneur, somebody who's forward thinking, and those you have to pay more to get that kind of talent.
Yeah, I know it can sting, but it certainly can come back and be beneficial.
I would piggyback onto what Lisa said, and I could not agree more, especially in those roles of general manager, property manager, regional manager, of really having leadership positions. And when we kind of talk about the remainder of the on-site team, and I think that perhaps they don't have to have quite the experience or the depth. But what I would say is that instead of putting them on an 8-month track, right? I've seen this before, that, okay, well, you'll be in leasing for 8 months, and then you'll be an assistant property manager for 8 months, and then you'll move up. And I think that is not only a disservice to the property of not, mentoring and growing and developing our talent, but then, it's such a disservice to the employee of rushing them along and putting them in a position that they're not qualified for. So also, I think that there's something to be said about also paying for them to stay in a position until they're ready to go to the next one.
Yeah. Although they might not love, seeing their growth capped, but I think if you don't promise that from the beginning, then they'll likely understand. It's merit based.
Absolutely, and I would never want to cap anybody's growth. And I think that there's just it is determined by the associate. It's determined by how quickly they grow. But to put it on a fast track and to say that they will be this in this amount of time, I think it just doesn't work. It not usually, at least.
You said on-site teams, and I've heard more and more about portfolios and owners with large, lots of buildings being able to kind of consolidate certain aspects of the operations into off-site teams, right? I think, maybe a call center for some of your, inbound leasing calls and stuff. Mendoa, from your experience, are you seeing some operators that are doing this? And what exactly do you think can be kind of pulled into a more of a communal aspect without negatively impacting each building?
So I think, first of all, I think it's a very controversial topic. We've heard a lot about it in the industry, and I think that sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. I think that you really have to take into consideration where your properties are positioned, where they're located. We're lucky in markets, we have a lot of support, and so I know that I can call on people whenever I need them, but that's not always necessarily the case. So when we start really talking about outsourcing, it comes down to what your portfolio looks like. And I think that there are some things, I think there are administrative tasks that it works really well for. I think that that there are also, the consolidated leasing offices. I think that those work well also. But I think that there is also something really to be said about a resident coming in and seeing that face that they know, that they feel comfortable with, and to get that level of service that they know that they should that they've come to expect. So I think, it's hit or miss, and it's an investment. It's not something to enter in lightly. I don't think you go into it saying, I'm going to start this next month. There is a lot of planning. And I think that when we start talking about how does that impact your resident, there's huge implications there on your residents.
Yeah, do you guys do any outsourcing?
Yeah, no, the thing that I'll add is that I agree with everything that's been said. We have actually owners with centralized staffing for administrative tasks. So any like move out, move in, accounting, those type of functions could be centralized, so you can eliminate the cost, right, of putting that pressure on the on-site team. And then we have owners that have 1 or 2 assets with us where they're completely independent and they may not subscribe to the centralized staffing model. So we have a combination of both, and it depends on the circumstance and how big the portfolio is and if the owner wants to share. But most of our staffing is actually done in-house. The reason we believe in that, as such on, is that that's how you're going to get a higher quality of service. So all our experienced associate, which is our front desk personnel, those we actually hire directly because we want to be able to train them in a certain way. We have our app that they use. And so we found that when you outsource those functions, you can't get a consistent quality of labor, and they just are not as engaged and they just are not as empowered. And so when they're an employee of ours, they also get stock options as being part of our company. That's how you get a higher level of service from even an entry-level position. And so all our positions are actually hired directly on for that specific reason, is that it's just, we can't run a high quality building with outsource uncertainty. And so unless you find somebody who's top tier concierge, but we just haven't had that success of finding a consistent vendor with a front desk.
Yeah, I think the personal treatment, right, is hard to replace. Like having someone that knows you, knows your name, and see the same person over and over again. I think that kind of rises a building to a Class A level where,
And those employees, you could tell they're proud. They have much higher engagement. They feel like they're part of the community. They're not like an outsourced labor. People know them by name. They have their uniform. It's also better for the employee in the sense where we're treating them as the rest of the community rather than saying, hey, you're an outsourced vendor and we're like on site. It already creates this divide, right?
Yeah, that's a great point. I think I'm always surprised that, so many, younger people that are going through college or looking for careers, that building management doesn't come up almost ever as like someone's career, even though it is lucrative, I would say, very rewarding in a lot of ways. So do you see that this also helps bring in new talent, right? That, because I think the younger generation kind of want to be part of something, want to have this kind of, sense of belonging with their job. So have you seen kind of new talent really kind of attaching to this idea of stock options and being part of a team?
I'll take that first, but it's kind of combination of both. So we don't necessarily look for staffing in one particular place. We tend to go find them in hospitality markets. So we actually, Ku, who runs our experience, so she actually goes to bars and restaurants because she said if a bartender can handle people yelling and screaming at them, throwing money, might want my drink, they can certainly handle a complaint from a resident. So when we go into each market, we have somebody that's going out and trying to source talent, and they can come from different industries, depending on where we are. So we find that once they have the hospitality mindset, it's really easy to train them for that front desk to do those responsibilities. And so we just have different ways of looking at staffing.
Absolutely.
I think Lisa hit on something incredibly important, and that is not only the hospitality side, but I think to find a great associate, we really need to find people that want to serve. And not everybody does. Some people think that that might be beneath them, or it's just not that's not the career for them. And that is a critical thing that we look for in our associates is we are here to serve. We're here to serve. We serve our owners, our customers, and each other, frankly. So if that's not ingrained, sometimes it's going to be difficult.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk about maintenance a little bit. I mean, that's another kind of large cost, and usually, is done in house. I think most people kind of assume, oh, there's not much you can do. Things are going to break, but I know a lot of tech platforms now are able to kind of give some preventative maintenance suggestions, right? So, Mendo, I'll stick with you on this. How do you kind of look at the whole maintenance spectrum, and maybe where's some cost cutting that can be had there?
Sure. So one of the things I look at, what I think can be really impacted by maintenance, I touched on it earlier, is really, kind of insurance, and why a great maintenance plan is so critical. And so, I think one of the things beyond interest rates that we can all sort of lament on as a group is skyrocketing insurance premiums. And, the thing I didn't realized was that according to Yardi Maintenance, their newest multifamily expenses report, property insurance premiums really saw the steepest rise out of all expenses by almost 28% year over year, as of January of 2024. And in fact, these premiums have risen 129%. Nationally since 2018. I mean, that's staggering, 129% for insurance premiums. We don't need to go into all of that, but one of the things that I would strongly encourage owners and asset managers to partner with their operators in doing is reviewing the loss history for a property in a portfolio and really understand where those losses are stemming and whether there is anything that can, be done to control them. I don't think anybody on this call is going to find it entirely surprising, but usually water intrusion is usually at the top of that list for losses. And if they're stemming from environmental, let's say a hurricane, there's not a lot you can do to prevent it. I've tried. Being from Florida, I've tried, but I haven't had much success. But what I have had success with is really preparing for it. If these losses are due to resident behavior, how can that be curtailed? How do we educate our residents on the importance of reporting minor issues, before they turn into major ones? And so, we've been thinking a lot about, water losses, and when digging into these, your standard water leaks really are primary drivers. And beyond fixing what's leaking, what steps can we take to minimize the damage? One thing we recommend is having your maintenance team install water sensors. So by continuously monitoring moisture levels, water sensors can detect leaks at their inceptions, and that enables immediate intervention. It's a proactive and frankly a pretty cheap approach to reduce the extent of water damage and minimize the subsequent cost of the repairs. So, the other thing that you were sort of alluding to is I would ask myself, what does my PM plan look like? My preventative maintenance plan. At JLL, we have what's called the OCP. It's our operational compliance program. And I'm going to shamelessly plug it for a second, but it's a comprehensive approach to risk management. And I think that the really important part of this is that it is administered by our on-site teams on a day-to-day basis at the properties that we manage. So there are over 300 areas that we look at within 9 categories. And one of the most important is that property inspection. It's crucial for identifying potential problems and really getting in front of it. And I'll wrap it up with saying, those are some things, if you take those insights and programs, perhaps to your insurance carrier, they might warrant a rate reduction. If you have these programs in place, the worst they can say is no. But at a minimum, you've just implemented real cost-saving changes and strategies into your assets, and that'll continue to pay off in perpetuity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm always surprised by how easy and cheap water sensors are to install, how few buildings, have them, at least in an array that would really be helpful. Lisa, do you have anything to add? How do you guys think about maintenance as far as trying to, keep costs down?
Yeah, so I mean, our leadership position means the same thing. We usually want to find higher caliber talent, pay more, because again, that person needs to be a problem solver and be able to identify if there are certain trends. And that person's going through all the work orders to say like, hey, is there a common theme? Do I have a lot of repetitive repairs that I'm doing? In the past, there was an incident where there was a lot of work orders for toilets and so what we have found out was that the toilets that were replaced were these low flow toilets that were defective. And Maine's rightfully so, they're just trying to, fix the problem. But what should have bubbled up is we need to actually throughout replace all these toilets because the toilets flaw. So that's where like you have to instigate, and with the right leader in Maine's, that person will pick up like, wow, I'm awfully spending a lot of time doing this I shouldn't be spending time on. And so, when you have to kind of go down even to the details of like, if I'm painting this apartment, should it be flat? Should it be should it be a eggshell? Like what kind of texture do you paint in what area? So like somebody who cares about the building are going to naturally ask these questions to figure out how do I maintain this building to save the owner costs without creating a lot of capital issues. Because as you know, like sometimes in Maine's, they just fix the day-to-day problems, and sometimes they'll repair the same problem over and over. And the right thing to do is just to replace the item, or they might decide to replace something that could be repair. So that person needs to understand when do you replace versus repair, and then when do you, signal like, hey, there's an issue here, and then also be able to hold their team accountable. Like, how many work orders does each tech do per day? How long does it take for them to turn over an apartment? All these need to be measured and reported so that they know who's actually doing the work and not doing. And that's how you get a maintenance team accountable. So again, it's all about the active management, but going down to the details of like, how do you hold somebody responsible and accountable, but having like the owner's hat on and saying like, what would I do if this was my asset?
Yeah, I think there's also kind of a misconception that the maintenance team isn't, kind of resident facing. I've heard that, a lot of complaints come from kind of ill-handled maintenance requests, and maybe you're, John the handyman isn't the best person to liaise with the resident, right? So having kind of a maintenance manager has that same mindset, right? Hospitality, service, I think could do a lot too of.
Yeah, you're spot on. You look at the reviews, almost half of them are because what maintenance did and their performance. We have assets where like 75% of the positive feedback is all about this one maintenance guy.
Yeah.
It's so true. I could, that is so true. And sometimes you're like, wow, you guys really have an opportunity to be a superhero. And not saying what they do on a day-to-day is easy. It's a lot of skill, it's a lot of talent. But really the customer service and the communication, just communicating with a resident. If the washer's not fixed, well, when do we anticipate it being fixed and why isn't it fixed? Really lending itself to training on how to treat residents. It's critical, but I agree.
Well, I think we talked a little bit about insurance, but I kind of want to hit on it just one more time because I know this is so critical, right? I think most people kind of understand there's not much we can do. Insurance rates are going up, except for maybe shop around or reduce our coverage or increase our deductibles. But are there things that you have seen that are effective? Like you say, going back to the insurance company and saying, look, we have this new, these new sensors, for example. Well, what are the things that you think can really help control insurance costs? Mendo, I'll start with you on this one.
So I touched on them a little bit. I think having a preventative maintenance, preventative plan into place and really having understanding your risks, how to limit those. Are we compliant with permits and inspections and all of those things? But I think that there's kind of one thing maybe that we can do to look outside the box, and that's this isn't about property insurance, it's about renters insurance. And I would say really two things about renters insurance. insurance. I feel like sometimes that can just be a set it and forget it kind of a program. It's like, well, yeah, we have a renter's insurance program, check, next item on the list. But I would encourage operators to really take a close look at the renter's insurance program and requirements, as well as how your associates are trained on how to manage it. And so as we've discussed, I mean, costs for everything really have risen, and that includes construction costs. And are you requiring enough liability coverage from your residents to cover the cost of putting your building back together if there's a catastrophic loss? And for the last decade or so, I feel like it's been longer than that, actually. The industry standard has been $100,000. Do you have $100,000? Your renter should have $100,000. And now, it's got me thinking: is that really enough for some of our properties? I mean, and so ask yourself: is it enough for yours? Maybe yes, maybe no. I don't have the answer for that. It depends on your asset. But what I would encourage owners to do is have those discussions with their carriers. And while we're at it, how do you track resident policies? Does your current provider have safeguards in place so when there's a lapse in coverage? The second thing I think is, it seems so fundamental and almost to the point of being elementary, but the other thing is actually following through on the claim. And I think before everybody goes, oh, of course we do that, but really stop and think about the last time you received a renter's insurance payout that was not related to a catastrophic loss. And so we go through this all the time. Residents, whether or not they mean to, things happen, life happens. Don't get me started on the resident, who took an Ambien and ran a bath on the 26th floor. We're not going to go down that road right now. But really, does your on-site manager truly understand the renter's insurance process? Do they know when to insist that a resident file a claim? Do they have a process in place to manage that? And while I feel like that's primarily what I'm speaking about is insurance, it's really at a high level. Insurance is complicated, but ensuring your managers are recouping funds from those types of losses, I think, is incredibly important to the bottom line.
Lisa, you have anything to add to that? How do you guys think about insurance?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really well said. I mean, I think the only thing I would add is that, I think at high rises, 100,000 seems like it's the minimum at this point. I mean, if you have a water intrusion issue that involves multiple floors, 100,000 seems light. So again, it's about applying different coverages for different types of buildings that you're going to be exposed to. And then also looking at the type of claims it has been on the asset and trying to rectify some of the issues. If you have a history of water intrusion issues on the claim, it should be an active conversation with the carrier about what mitigation you're taking. Is it these, water sensors? Are there retrofitting projects that you could do to minimize? Like one of the common water intrusion is when people hang their hanger on the water sprinkler because they don't know, especially international people, they don't know that's a water sprinkler. So do you need to put a cage over it, or do you need to do something? So something like that is just, you have to kind of fix the issues to minimize the number of claims. And then same thing with renter insurance is that when somebody is not active, there's an automatic policy that kicks in for them, and then you're going after them for the premium payment. Otherwise, you leave yourself exposed. And trying to manage that program, it doesn't seem to make sense to do individually on your own. You need to basically work with an insurance company to help you to make sure that there's compliance, and if not, then there's an automatic adoption for that resident.
Yeah, I think shopping for insurers solely based on the price of the policy is probably not the best practice, right? There is a lot.
The renters will pick the lowest premium. That do not have the right coverage, and then
lo and behold, they have the lowest service.
It's actually you have to actually have that specifically, because there are policies that exclude those type of damages. So you just have to be clear-eyed about what you're requiring that would expose your building.
Absolutely. And I have to laugh. I didn't mean to laugh, but when Lisa, you just brought up the sprinklers, and that is a very real thing. And so if nothing is taken from this today, it's put the cages over the sprinkler heads.
small
truly is
cost save you a
devastating.
lot of money.
Yeah.
All right, I want to talk about amenities a little bit here. I think these are often one of the first things kind of, taken away. I think some owners and operators see them as kind of ancillary things that aren't, the four walls that you live in and the basic product that you're delivering. But just interested about how you guys both see amenities, what's necessary, what's not, what you can maybe scale back, and what is probably worth protecting. Lisa, I'll stay with you on this one. When you're just highly amenitized, right? Your buildings.
Yeah, we are. So I would say Class A buildings and Class B have great amenities that no one ever uses. When you walk through these buildings, there's always few people. There might be some people in the gym. There might be a couple people in the lounge. And what we've learned is it is such a waste of space, no pun intended, when there's no activation. And so our model is to create activation with a staffing. So at our full service building, we have what we call director of lifestyle, who actually goes and activate buildings. So in some of our buildings, we're running a private club similar to a Soho House, like where it's a speakeasy lounge, there's alcohol, there's food being served, and it's a private retreat for the residents that live there that can bring their friend, be like, hey, let's go to the 40th Club and let's go grab a drink. Like, so that's the type of building that we love to manage. We bring in the hotel component into our space. And then, like I said, we have a former NFL player that's running one of our fitness center. He's doing all the classes and the private training. When we see that type of activation, that's when we see the use of the resident. The residents are like, wow, these amenities, I'm actually using them. Because what we find is when you leave the residents to their own devices, they don't really know what to do with these spaces. You go in a gym, you're like, okay, I'm going to go on the treadmill. I'm not really sure of this strength equipment. But if they had somebody that was an athlete showing them how to use it, you bet that they would have an attachment and know how to use the equipment. And that's what we're trying to develop, is the stickiness of all the different amenity spaces by having these events. Like in our San Francisco asset, there's like a drag brunch we bring in drag queens that come in, and it's like a pool party. There's like 80 people in attendance. It's just, you're trying to create this like community activity with the stickiness, so that it's not just this box with four walls, and the amenities just isn't this box of four walls. You're trying to create memories and experiences. And so that's been a passion of ours, is to really bring these amenity spaces alive. So people understand why the developer built them to begin with, because a lot of developers, they have these dreams about these amazing spaces, but they never communicate it to the users of how it's supposed to be used.
Right. Yeah, I think there's a change happening with the mentality. I think a lot of times people would assume that, yeah, the gym was just for the brochure, right? Like people want to see that there is a gym, but they might not use the gym. And now I think owners and operators are saying, well, let's get them to use the gym, right? Like it can go past just being that thing that maybe is, like you say, a box that's checked.
Yeah.
When renters are kind of going through their options. Mendoa, how about you? When you work with clients, what do you think as far as the whole kind of a list of amenities? What are some that maybe could take some more money, or ones that you could maybe pull some budget from?
So I think and our view on amenities is very similar to Lisa's, and really it's activating the spaces, and there are different approaches to that. And I think a lot of them have to do with budget. I think a lot of them have to do with the resident demographic. So it's understanding all of those components. It's relying on partnerships, whether that's a community partnership or vendor partnerships, to really host things that will bring residents together and activate that space. One of the things, and I'm probably not saying anything that people don't already know, but to reuse the term stickiness, we want to create those experiences for our residents. We want them to develop relationships as they progress in their tenancy. We want that keeps them there. That's what for us creates stickiness, is that when you know one person in the building, you are far more likely to renew. If you know two, you're over 60% more likely to renew. So those are real numbers when it comes to alleviating vacancy loss and turnover costs and keeping residents happy and promoting the sentiment of the building. So we look at it in that respect. And I do agree, that there are some visions. The demonstration kitchen, I still haven't figured that one out. I think that there's always that sort of, vision of Wolfgang Puck is going to be doing, a demonstration on lobster ravioli, and that's not necessarily the case. But also figuring out ways to use that demonstration kitchen differently. Can, during the day, can there be co-working spaces there? Can, it support something else? And but I think, it gets expensive. And and I saw a question come in about amenities fees, and I think that that's really, it depends on your market. Some of them, they can support amenities fees, others don't. So really relying on partnerships, I think, is key and beneficial.
Yeah. What about when we're looking at some of these things, I think the hard thing is that your property owners are looking at reducing costs, but sometimes to reduce costs, they have to make these capital expenses, right? And some of these can be kind of hard to swallow, but I think in the long run are probably good. I'm thinking particularly about like energy efficiency upgrades, right? This is something, particularly if the resident isn't paying for energy, that can account to, like, some great future cash flow, but might be hard, right off the bat. Mendo, I'll stick with you here. What do you think when, people are looking at kind of the hard times ahead? Do you still suggest that there are some capital expenses that are worth it?
I do. I think, again, I hate to continue to use the phrase "it depends," but it does depend. I think that there are opportunities, especially when it comes to sustainability and energy efficiencies. I mean, look, at the end of the day, we all know incandescent light bulbs could not, I mean, they're a drain, they're expensive. But also then you start factoring in the cost of retrofitting and like new light fixtures and bulbs. But I think finding an operator that's really going to help you recoup some of that. I mean, there are programs in place to help owners with things like that. But I think that there is a time and a place for launching capital improvements. And the other place I would say that would be beneficial is in the value add space. That deploying these renovation programs, if you can prove out recapturing the increases in rents, by all means, I think that it's incredibly important.
Mm-hmm. Lisa, how about you? I mean, do you guys set aside some budget when you bring in a new building to do some of these capital improvements?
Yeah, so I'm going to say the famous quote of it depends. It all depends on what your hold time is going to be and what your exit strategy, right? If you're only planning on holding it for 2-3 years, some of these improvements may not be realized in terms of like either increasing rent or reduced expenses for multiple years. And so what you want to make sure is that if it needs to line up when you're exiting, because then you'll get the valuation and get recognized for the work that you've done. But there's so many things that you could do with capital. Sustainability is a big one. You can have solar. I mean, there's so many other projects that relate to water. If you're in states where water is expensive, you can look at drought tolerant type of planning material. You can look at, ways to mitigate and save water that way. And then you can go down to all the apartment finishes, to the type of countertops that you're using, to the flooring, because the countertop will drive, do you put it in quartz right now? Are you going to get higher rents? But that's also great for maintenance. And so it all depends on when do you intend to want to get this capital recoup, and then when do you think you're going to exit on the strategy. So typically my rough rule of thumb is that you want to get the payback in that item within 10 years, or otherwise within its useful life. So if the useful life is 5 years, you want to make sure you get that capital investment back plus your cost of capital. So that's kind of a quick and easy way to measure. And so it's really important when you're putting an improvement is that you're asking yourself, what is the ongoing cost or cost reduction? And then what's the capital cost, and when you're planning on recovering that. So all those need to be factored in addition to, like, what's your whole strategy.
Totally. Lisa, I have a question here I think is directed to you, which is, do you charge amenity usage fees or to build it into rent or mixed, right? When you have some of these quite probably expensive amenities. Is there an extra fee that comes with some of them?
In most of our properties, it's not an extra fee because we're in states where you cannot charge a separate fee, so it's built in the rent. And that goes with the theme that we asked ourselves a lot is the resident willing to pay for these activities or these amenities, right? So if they're not paying for it, then we shouldn't do it. Otherwise, you're just spending money for the sake of spending money. And so my favorite example is like a lot of operators, they just put some cheese and crackers and maybe a little wine together, and they call it wine night for their residents. But if all your residents are not going to pay you $1 or $2 more rent for that activity, then don't do it. Because at the end of the day, what you're doing has to translate back to what somebody's willingness to pay. And so the way we measure that is we measure our competitor. And so our buildings typically run about 10 to 50% higher rent than our competition across the street. And that's how we can justify having all these different activities and costs associated with it. But it's all about like, how do you measure it, right? Like, if you can't measure it, then don't do it.
Yeah.
I piggyback onto that just for a second, and I think Lisa made just such an incredible point. And there's no value in why do it. And I think though that there comes a time when you have to make that difficult decision that maybe it isn't working. And what does that look like? So, in terms of budget decisions, I mean, it's really important to consider the impact of those decisions on the resident experience. And so my recommendation would be, before making any of those decisions, if you're going to eliminate a service or an amenity, that we consider the impact on that resident base. And this is not so much as an amenity, but more of a service. I'll give the example of considering reduction in front desk coverage has sort of been a hot topic, and maybe the elimination of an overnight shift. And what I would really want to investigate is, what would that look like from an operations standpoint, but is equally important is, what does that look like from the resident's perspective? Property managers should ensure that these decisions don't increase risk. Does the property have backup technology like access control? Are the residents currently using it? What does guest management look like, and food delivery? And having your PM sort of live a few days in the life of and work the desk during those shifts to fully understand really what the impact on a decision like this would have. And then I think going a little bit further and really sort of, granting ourselves a little bit of time before implementing those changes rather than just rushing into them. I think that's incredibly prudent. It becomes crucial to carefully message and educate residents who become accustomed maybe to relying on those services. So working with them, retraining them, and ensuring clear messages, I think, are essential steps to minimizing the disruptions when we choose to eliminate amenities and services.
Mm-hmm. That's a great point. I think, I'm also interested when it comes to these highly amenitized buildings, like you say, you have to really understand, is this going to come back, right? Is this something that people are going to pay more for? In order to know that, I think, your marketing segmentation has to be pretty precise too, right? I think from what I'm learning is that a lot of Class A buildings are not built for everyone. There is built for a specific demographic, right? So as you look at a new building, how do you make that determination? That's what I'm always so interested. I guess there's a bit of the demographics in the area, a bit of what the building already has to offer, maybe some branding of the company. But, Lisa, I know you guys are very highly branded. You kind of have a very specific target. How do you make that decision when you come to a new building and say, okay, we want this to be for young professionals or families or whatever it may be?
If it's under development, we have an opportunity to provide input, through trial and error of what we know has worked and the type of spaces that we need. So we may not put in a demonstration kitchen. We might actually have a full kitchen with a bar if we think that people want to have F&B service in their buildings. But if we're not involved in it, we take over a building. We actually collect information because all the residents use our app. It's called the Central Life app, and you can find it on Apple. It's ranked like 4.9 stars out of 5. And all our residents do their activity in terms of the activities that they're planning to attend, or order to call their car, if they want to order food, they do everything through their app. And so one of the great things about it is that you can now look at behaviors of why they're, of how they're responding. And so when we look at the type of mini spaces they're using, even the type of like events that they want to attend, we can tell if something's working or not working, right? So if you have the data that, this event, 80 people are attending, this is another event that you threw on is 10 people, you're probably not going to do the 10 people event anymore. And that's the problem with a lot of these like blanket, approach with a lot of operators is just like, let's just do something just to check it off the box. But you have to get smarter and keep elevating the service. I mean, we have some buildings where, because there's these spa massage rooms, I'm not going to name where it is, but you could probably guess what geographical area. It's in a vein area of United States where we have like Botox and injection days where people come in to do injections for the residents, right? So like that obviously is not going to happen in certain activities in certain states, but that's how you customize the programming to that geographical area. And so you're utilizing the spaces to also like maximize and optimize how the resident's going to be able to get their amenity spaces. So, but it's all about the app. I mean, we know down to the level of what type of drinks they like, if they drink coffee or cafe, the type of alcohol they like, their dog's name, the type of dog, the weight of their dog, do the dog like biscuits or like jerky, because that's how we know we can customize that approach with that person coming in. So, and somebody who has at the higher rent level, that's what they're expecting from us. They're not expecting the same treatment as you and I, because you and I have different preferences.
Right. Botox as a service. That's the first time I've heard that before, but very interesting. Mendo, we got a couple minutes here. I just want to hear from you. When you're working with clients and you're trying to understand marketing segmentation, right? What's some of the process of understanding what's the best way to position a building?
Again, I think, I think, Lisa covered it beautifully. It's really, can we get in there? Do we have any influence in the very beginning of the development? But then I think it's utilizing all of those marketing sources to tell a story. You've got to brand that building, give it an identity. What does it really stand for? And then and know your target audience. Tailor your SEO and your SEM to those renters. I mean, there's nothing worse than having. I've managed a lot of buildings in DC where during the day or during the week, it's a government contractor that's living in there. He does not care about the yoga studio, right? He wants to go in and he wants to sleep. And so if, that to him is going to feel like a waste. And so it's really understanding who that target demographic or who that demographic is and really targeting them through mindful and thoughtful marketing. And by the way, I believe that all buildings should have a yoga room. So that's not me. However, I just use that as an example. Yeah. That's not critical to them. Having a playground is not critical necessarily in downtown DC, right? I mean, it is in the burbs. So know your audience. Absolutely.
Be honest with, who they are and what they really need.
Wholeheartedly, and promote it. Absolutely promote it. If somebody logs on and sees the first thing is a great big pool party, and that introverted government contractor is like, no thanks, I'm not, that's not my thing, that's not my style. I want to put my money elsewhere. And so I think, be upfront.
Yeah, I think people appreciate that too, right? That they know this is tailored for me. This is my kind of a place. The stickiness we talked about, right? It's not just, oh, this is just anybody can live here, right? It's really the connection that people have.
Exactly. It's truly the connection. It really is. Where are you going to feel the most at home?
Yeah.
Where are you going to enjoy living the most? And find those people.
Well, great. We will end there. Mendo, Lisa, thank you so much. If anybody listening would like to get in contact with either of these experts, I'd be happy to make a connection. Please email me. It's franco@propmodo.com. That's FRANCO@propmodo.com. Thanks everybody for joining, and hope to see you all again next time. Have a good rest of the